You ever see one of those debates come across the internet that you just can't help putting your 2 cents in about? Well, earlier this week, Andy Staples from On3 put out his list of what is considered a blue blood in college football. And David and I couldn't help it. We've got to give our take on it. So that's what we're here to do tonight on Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. Welcome everybody to Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. I am your host this evening, Ed Smith, and with me is David Street.
What's up, y'all? And we are now only 3 subscribers away from 100 on YouTube. And remember what we talked about before. Whoever the 100th subscriber is, we will be in contact with you for a $25 coffee gift card. Just 3 away from 100. So just please help us reach that goal. We would not be doing this without you guys.
We thank y'all so much for tuning in. And earlier this week, Andy Staples, he pulled out this chart of what is a blue blood in college football and gave his criteria. And I wanted to get, David, your take on what you consider a blue blood to be for college football, because I feel like everybody has their own criteria for this.
Well, Ed, I have found that when making a criteria for what constitutes as a blue blood, it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Because let me tell you, as I was working on what my personal criteria for a blue blood is, I made a tweet a few days ago where I said that I don't think Penn State is a blue blood, and yet with the criteria that I have come up with, Penn State would qualify as a blue blood. So now it's like, okay, like what the hell? Like what even is a blue blood? But I think, you know, I think a line has to be drawn somewhere, and so I think at the very least, and I acknowledge that what I'm about to say may not be perfect, and it's going to be debated, and I'll probably change my mind later on. But when I think about it, I would say ask the following questions for your program. Okay, does your program have a rich history, and or does your program have multiple national championships? I would say maybe 5. I think 5 is a good benchmark. And is your program still relevant today? So, does your program have a rich history, and or does your program have multiple national championships? Perhaps 5. Like I said, I think 5 is a decent benchmark. And is your program still relevant today? Or do they have the capabilities? Do they have the resources? Do they have what they need to be relevant today? Again, I acknowledge that may not be the perfect way to measure it, but it does have to be measured somehow.
That's a fair enough assessment on that. And just to give you my criteria, I feel like it is a program that has a rich football history, one that does have multiple national championships to its credit, but also this is a topic that I feel can have a sliding scale over 20-year periods, because if somebody is relevant, say, before the year 2000, and they are the absolute beast of college football, but yet over the past 25 years, they have fallen out of being relevant and or successful in that 25-year span, then they start to lose some of that status as being a blue blood, leaving room for other teams to come up in their place.
Yeah.
So there is some variable in my mind that can take place. Nothing is set in stone ever in any of these conversations, but there's the staunch defenders of once you have the title, the moniker, then you will always have it. And there are those that are like, well, no, what have you done for me lately? Much like anything else in life, it's somewhere in the middle. And hopefully we can have a great conversation about where that middle ground is.
And one
And
more thing.
I'd like to start, if I could, David, by just naming the teams that were listed as Blue Bloods, and then we will get into some other teams that are on the cusp in different ways a little bit later on. So just to name those teams off, you have Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Michigan, Notre Dame, Texas, Georgia, USC, and Penn State. Now, to start off with the top, I think it's fairly easy to not need a conversation when we're talking about Alabama.
No, not at all.
There's zero reason for a conversation there. I feel like there's zero conversation for Michigan. Would
Agreed.
you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean they have the national championships, and Michigan is the only football program with 1,000 wins. So
Right.
yeah,
But once we get past those, uh, we can start having a discussion which could very easily be a very short discussion,
hmm
but there are those that couldn't take a much longer discussion. So, going through it, do we need to have a discussion about Ohio State?
I don't think so, Ed. I think Ohio State is fairly comfortably a blue blood. Like maybe not so much comfortably like Alabama or Michigan, but I think Ohio State has the history. They have the natties. I think, yeah, I think Ohio State is still a blue blood, especially considering the fact that they're obviously still absolutely relevant today.
I 100% agree. And just for clarification's sake, when we mention the number of national titles, we're going to go off of the AP listing of national titles. I know there have been several other services that have claimed national championships, and the schools are more than happy to do that, a la UCF. But that there are too many to claim across the board. So we're just going to go with AP.
I think
And go
I
ahead.
think I think something else, Ed, that we also need to put our foot down on is it's not just the fact that you have multiple national championships, but you had to have won some of those at least when the competition was decent. Hence why we don't have a school like Yale in our blue bloods because they have damn near 30 titles, but they also won all their titles when the competition was basically no competition.
Agreed. Agreed. So just for those clarification's sake. Now, after Ohio State, we get into Oklahoma. This gets a little on the line, and we need to have a conversation about for that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree because I think would I still consider Oklahoma a blue blood? I would, you know, because they're still relevant today. They've made multiple playoff appearances and they have multiple natties, but they also haven't won a natty in 24 or 25 years.
Correct. So over the last 20 years, Oklahoma has won 214 games. They've only lost 57. That is a average of about two and a third uh, losses per year out of a 12 game schedule plus bowl games. They are absolutely relevant over the past 20 years. Their their all time record is over an 890 wins. That is definitely top 10. I don't have that list in front of me right now. Uh, and the 7 national titles. Now, granted, most of those titles were in the triple option era, if you will, and it's been a very long time. Their last national championship was the year 2000, 2001 national championship game against Florida State. Uh, but overall, this is a program that has the name recognition and marketability of being a stalwart of college football. They are a successful team in the past and still relevant today. And they do have the national championships through time to lean on, even though they haven't had a national title in the last 20 years. Their last chance at a national title was 2004 against USC, and we saw what happened there. Eek.
Yeah.
So I would definitely put them in the blue blood category. I think David and I are definitely in agreement with that.
Mm-hmm.
The next one that we talk about, I would venture to say is a bit of an anomaly, but uh, I want to hear your thoughts on Notre Dame.
I think what Notre Dame has going for them, they certainly have the history, and they certainly have the national championships. And to be fair, Notre Dame is still relevant today. But I think the question we need to ask is, does Notre Dame have a legit shot to win the national championship? Okay, I'm not talking about making the playoffs, because Notre Dame has made the playoffs a couple times before. I think they're absolutely good enough for that. But is Notre Dame today good enough to win the national championship? And to be honest with you, Ed, and I could be wrong, I acknowledge that, but I don't think Notre Dame is good enough to win a national championship today. I just think I don't think they're ever going to get the recruiting. Not like certainly not like Georgia or LSU or Alabama. But as far as their status as a blue blood, I don't think they have lost it yet. But I think they are slowly, perhaps, losing their grip on it.
I'm going to disagree with that. And the reason being, yes, they have the history of the national titles. Yes, they have over 890 wins themselves. But when you think of college football, can you dare think of college football without Notre Dame? That that definitely is one of the first helmets, if anything.
So which part? So which part of mine do you disagree with? The part where I say that they're still blue blood, but they're losing their grip on it.
I I think yeah, that
Okay.
portion there where they're losing their grip on it because they are still one of the most marketable teams
Mm.
as a cornerstone of what college football is. Who doesn't know about touchdown Jesus? It's
Or or
it's
Rudy.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
a it is a entire section of college football's history as a whole is dedicated to Notre Dame. And to this day, they are still revered. They are still marketed. By goodness, they have their own TV contract with NBC because they are, if not the face of college football or the helmet of college football, they are basically the granddad of college football because it was during the time where Notre Dame was most dominant, playing anybody anywhere, where people started to take notice of college football uh, as a sport to watch outside of baseball being America's sport.
Mm-hmm.
So I I think it's going to take a lot of years of Notre Dame becoming irrelevant and not marketable and a complete lack of success before we even get to that conversation. They've won 173 games over the past 20 years, which I'm using 20 years as a benchmark to say have they lost their grip on their blue blood status because they become irrelevant due to lack of success. Well, Notre Dame, they've had success, not as much success as some of these other teams, but
Mm.
they don't have to have as much success as these other teams to maintain its blue blood status.
That's fair.
You know, next I'm going to uh, bring up one of the newest kids to the party in the blue blood talk, and that's Georgia. You want to mention a few things about them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add my piece. Um, I don't think Georgia is a blue blood, and I'm not saying this because I'm a Florida fan. Okay, I don't think we're a blue blood either for the matter. Okay, um, I would, and I'm probably jumping the gun here a little bit because we're going to get to it later. But I have Georgia in my list of new bloods. But the reason why I don't consider Georgia a blue blood is because they don't really have the history like other teams like Alabama or Notre Dame or Michigan. I mean, they won their first title in 1942, and then they went damn near 40 years without, before winning another one. And then they went another near 40 years before winning another one. However, I will say this, you know, I said before that I think 5 is a good benchmark. If Georgia wins the national championship this season, which I think they are, Ed, I don't think anybody's close to them. I think Georgia's going to win the national championship. If they win the national championship, that'll give them 5, and I think 5 will be enough to make them a blue blood, in my opinion.
Fair point. Uh, per your prediction, this is also a team that's going to have to come to Austin and play Texas. They're going to have to go to Alabama, and plus the gauntlet of what the playoff is going to be. If they get to the national championship game and win it, which there are people out there that think that they can do it undefeated, then they absolutely are one of the best programs ever. Um, and it may be one of the best teams ever. But we'll get to that in a later episode.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Georgia being in this category does need history, and the thing with Georgia's history isn't the fact that they so much that they are without national titles. They have regular season wins. Their regular season record has enough wins in it to make them one of the more relevant teams by success standards as anybody else that's on this list. So the fact that they are now one of the most dominant programs in the country, they're new to the party. I I'm with you. I'm a little shaky on them actually being a true blue blood. The recency bias is definitely there with them on this list. I'm still skeptical, but I am one to judge slowly, not jump on the bandwagon as soon as it shows up. So I would not put them in this category, but they're very close. Give them a couple more seasons of good success, especially now with this playoff system. I think we will see them for sure be in this category without question here shortly.
Yeah, I think we're both in agreement. And also, like, when I say that Georgia doesn't really have the history like Alabama or, Michigan, one might think, well, like they won in 1942, is that not history? But I think you know what I'm talking about, Ed, that it's like, okay, it's not just enough to win one back in the old days. You had to have won multiple in the old days. So that's what I mean when I say they don't have the history like Michigan or Alabama or Notre Dame or schools like that.
Sure.
Yeah,
And I we are definitely in agreement. It's going to take a few more seasons of maintaining that level of success for them to be in the category, according to us.
for sure.
Um, Next, I want to give a little hook 'em here. Texas. Texas is one of those programs that, much like Notre Dame, is a flagship of college football. Yes, you have Alabama has always been a flagship of the South. Texas has been a flagship of the South, especially from the state of Texas, which everybody knows is known as a football mad, hungry state. And as the Longhorns, we have a national title within the last 20 years, although time is quickly evaporating on that. We have 172 wins over the last 20 years. So we've had a level of success. It's not the level of success that we had during the 2000s,
Mm.
which we went through and lost an average of 1.7 games per year during that stretch. Uh, we've had some turnover, but we are definitely on the tracks now and going into the SEC. We're going to test it out. We're going to see how this car drives. As far as national titles, we have 4 to our credit, and we're almost at 900 wins as a program. There's not a lot of programs out there that can match up with our resume as far as that goes. When you are thinking of the emblems and the pageantry and the marketability of a program, there's a reason why a lower level Texas school gets bowl games that they don't deserve, because the advertisers for the bowl games want the fans of Texas that travel very well to show up and show out. And we have Texas fans across the country. It's very much like Michigan fans. It's very much like USC fans. It's very much um, like Notre Dame fans. Alabama kind of stays in their little corner and says
Yeah.
"Roll Tide" to themselves over and over again. But Texas itself, it is very marketable. It has a level of success. It has a history of success. I think there's not much conversation that is truly needed in this category of them being in that blue blood status. Street, would you agree?
I definitely do agree. There's really no argument for me. I do think Texas is a blue blood. But that being said, Ed, you're not gonna like this. Like, I'm not saying this is my opinion, but I have seen some people in the Twitterverse say that they don't think Texas is a blue blood, and I didn't bother asking, although maybe I should have. I don't think I really cared enough. But if I had to venture to guess why they don't think Texas is a blue blood,
They're
I
OU
would
fans.
probably. Well, one. Well, no, I don't. Yeah, yeah. But if I had to venture to guess, my guess would probably because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys have won national championships under only 2 coaches, and they're probably those people who think that your program, in order for your program to be a blue blood, it has to have won national championships under more than 2 coaches, under multiple coaches. I'm not saying that's a good argument at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was their argument. But no argument for me, Ed. I think you guys are a blue blood.
The the thing I see most about people hating on Texas being in this category is the arrogance that Texas has as a
Yeah.
as a football program. I'm I'm part of it. I can't help it. But there is definitely a swagger, confidence, and is deemed arrogance that comes from the Texas program that stirs up a lot of hate and a lot of emotion from a lot of people outside of our own rivalries. So I totally get where people would step in and say something to that effect. Um, Now, the team that Texas won their last national championship against is also listed here, and that's USC. I'm having difficulty with USC not sliding in this scale.
Hmm.
And it isn't necessarily because they've had a lack of wins. They have more wins than a couple of the other teams that we've talked about. Uh, their last national championship was 20 years ago. So they win this year or they're out, and as far as that 20-year category.
Yeah.
Their all-time record is a little bit lower as far as number of wins than some of these other teams we talked about. Being on the West Coast, it's difficult for them to be labeled a national brand when nobody ever gets to see them due to the way that TV contracts and TV marketing has been done over the past 20 years.
Yeah. Actually, something that we didn't really consider before, Ed, that maybe we should have. But do you think NFL draft picks should factor into a blue blood? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think part of what makes USC the program that it is that it has more draft picks in its history, I think, than any other program, or maybe any other program except for a couple others out there.
When were those draft picks made? Ties into the history on that time period before the year 2004 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say it does tie into the legacy portion of their status, but I don't think it's going to be as relevant as their total number of wins as a program. Because if we're just going off of draft picks, hell, every team in the SEC would be on this list.
Hey,
And I don't think that's necessarily right.
we'd be a blue blood, I think, if we just went off of draft picks.
So you get my point on that.
Yeah,
It's
for
a
sure.
matter of draft picks is a consideration, but I don't think it is a large enough percentage of consideration for it to catapult these programs into that category.
Yeah, I think it's fair.
Now, the last one that Andy Staples had added into his list was Penn State. And this one's a bit polarizing because, as you mentioned earlier, David, national titles by only 2 coaches. Well, guess what? National titles by only 1 coach.
Yep.
And that was Joe Paterno before the whole Sandusky thing took place. They have more wins than all but 2 on this list as far as regular season. But in the last 20 years, they've averaged about 2 to 3 losses per year, which means they've been relevant, but they haven't been successful. And successful being playing in the national championship game, winning their conferences. Granted, they've had Ohio State and Michigan in the way, but that's you can't really say the same thing to Ohio State. They've had Penn State and Michigan in the way, and they've done it. So why can't Penn State get over that hump? The no national titles in the last 20 years, the absolute turmoil that program has gone through since Joe Paterno was unceremoniously removed from coaching from the program before he passed, and the fact that the national championships are well before the year 2000. I believe his last one was 1987.
86, but close enough.
86.
Or
Okay.
I guess Ed, you were going with like the year that they literally won it, which would have been 87.
Yeah, that Orange Bowl game in which they wrapped it up. So I have a hard time keeping Penn State here. I think I would move them into a category that we'll get into a little bit later. But
Yeah.
David, do you agree with me?
I do. I mean, Penn State is very polarizing, Ed, because I feel like they pretty much have all the makings of a blue blood, except for arguably the most important aspect of a blue blood, and that's national championships. Like, I'm sorry, I cannot consider you a blue blood if you have just 2 national championships. No matter how many regular season wins you have, no matter how like no matter how successful you are everywhere else. And I'm curious, and you don't have to answer now because we're gonna get into it later. Because I am curious to see what category you would have Penn State in, and I'm curious to see what I would have Penn State in because I don't consider them a blue blood. I don't think I would even consider them a new blood, even though they are still, they have been relevant under James Franklin, and they've had some amount of moderate success under James Franklin. So it's like you're not a blue blood, you're not a you're not a blue blood, you're not a new blood, you're still decent. So it's like, where does that leave you? So again, you don't have to answer now because we'll talk about that later on, and I'm very curious to see what you're gonna have to say about that, Ed.
Okay. So just to recap, we both agree on Alabama as a blue blood,
Yep,
Ohio State, Oklahoma, Michigan, Notre Dame.
we're both in agreement on Notre Dame. I think maybe obviously we had some disagreements as to, like, are they losing their grip on their status or not? But at the end of the day, we're both in agreement that Notre Dame's a blue blood still.
So Texas,
Yep.
you. I think we're both kind of in a wait and see mode for Georgia.
Yep. Agreed.
USC is quickly slipping.
Yeah, actually, that's funny. I don't think I ever made my comment
Yeah,
about
please.
USC being a blue blood or not. I would probably still consider USC to be a blue blood.
I I'm going to say they're still there, but they need some high end success quickly.
I think there's definitely more room for debate about USC being a blue blood than obviously like Alabama or perhaps even Notre Dame.
So so give it to me. USC's argument.
I think their argument, they have the history, they have multiple national championships, and a chunk of those have come when the competition was decent, and USC is still relevant today. They've gone through a dead era. Between Lane Kiffin and in the era between Lane Kiffin and Lincoln Riley. I almost forgot who their coach was. Lincoln Riley has made USC relevant today. So yeah, that's what I would say. They have the history. They've won the titles when the competition was tight, and they're relevant. They're still good enough today.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm in that category where USC is still there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, their to me, their marketability has waned
Mm.
a bit, and that's not necessarily a fault of their own. That was their conference
Yeah.
that signed those god awful TV contracts to where nobody could step up and watch them.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, Ed, because there is the realization that even though USC is playing in a market like Los Angeles, they didn't really become relevant again until one young man, and that was Caleb Williams. Well, now Caleb Williams isn't there anymore.
Right. So who's going to be that next superstar that keeps people glued to the television set for USC games?
Hmm.
Now, the fact that they are in the Big Ten now, and they're going to have these games at Ohio State, at Michigan, at Nebraska, at Michigan State, even all the way across the country to Rutgers.
Yeah.
They're going to be playing in time slots in which people get to see who they are. And
Hmm.
I think that is a positive thing for them to stay relevant and marketable enough to be considered a cornerstone of college football. And
Yeah.
that's really what we're talking about here.
Hmm.
So we're both in agreement on USC. I
Hmm.
think we agree that Penn State can is in limbo somewhere
Yeah.
because they're not exactly new, they're not exactly old, they're just somewhere in
Yeah.
the
Right.
ether at this point. They're in
They're-
purgatory.
I was just about to say that, Ed. They're in college football purgatory.
Yeah, and that's and I don't know if Franklin's ever going to get them out, but if they're comfortable winning 9 games a year and not winning any conference championships, so be it. They
Yeah.
just are what they are at this point.
Dude, I don't think they're ever going to be. They're never going to be good enough under Franklin, and I think the reason why they're so content with Franklin, even though like Penn State is a program where you absolutely can have the success that Georgia's having now or the success that Alabama's had before. But I think the reason why Penn State is so content with Franklin is because he took over that program when Penn State was, going through its turmoil with the disgusting shit that Jerry Sandusky did, and so the administration was probably thinking, well, this man took over when really no other.
Bill
Oh,
O'Brien first.
okay, fair enough. Bill O'Brien did, yeah, yes. Bill O'Brien did take over, and if I recall correctly, he did a fairly decent job. But he took over for Bill O'Brien, and I think the administration was looking at James Franklin as someone who has done probably far better than anyone ever thought they could, especially given the Jerry Sandusky scandal. And so I think that's the reason why they're still sticking with James Franklin.
Yeah, and 9 wins is better than 6 wins,
Yep.
and as long as you keep getting 9 wins, you keep getting TV, broadcasting your whiteout games and showing off the campus and getting people there to eat all the ice cream out of the
Yeah.
Penn State Creamery. Uh, so be it if that's what they're
Well,
comfortable with.
Well, and I will add one more thing about Penn State before we move on, Ed. I can tell you, Ed, that Penn State fans, maybe not all of them, but a good chunk of Penn State fans are sick and tired of James Franklin, and they want to move on from him.
Yeah. When they see all the success going on around them and
Mm-hmm.
they're not part of it, it's kind of like going into a party and you see all the cool kids hanging out together. So you walk up with your red Solo cup in hand and just start giggling your way into the conversation. Absolutely nothing to say, but you're just giggling your way into the conversation
I like
before
that. Yeah.
everybody else disperses and talks bad about them behind their back.
Right.
Now, so that was the blue blood list. Now there's the contenders list, which we have broken up into two categories. One being the new bloods, meaning teams that don't necessarily have the history and the
Mm-hmm.
legacy of the blue blood status, and the old bloods that have all the legacy, but they don't have the level of within the last 20 years success
Yeah.
to get into the club or I get that status
Yeah.
or maintain that status.
And I think also part of what should make an old blood is that you're not as relevant as you were before, but you still have the capability, the resources. It would not be a surprise if you became relevant today or soon.
Absolutely. Now, we may not spend as much time on these as we did the actual blue blood list, but let's go through the new bloods. We have LSU, Clemson, Florida, Auburn, and Oregon. And David, I want you to just pick a team and give me your case for them.
Okay, first of all, I'm sorry to Matthew because I know he's going to watch this, but Oregon is absolutely not a new blood. Okay, in order to be a new blood, okay, you have to have at least one national championship. How can you be a new blood if you don't have any national championships whatsoever? I'm sorry, Oregon being on the list is a complete joke. And also, where's Florida State? Unless you said it and I must have missed it, Ed. Florida State's a new blood. In fact, I would say that Florida State is up there with Florida as well. Both of our programs, we don't really have the history or the prestige as the other programs out there, but we are programs that did succeed, later on in college football history. So put Florida State in the new bloods. But I would agree. Yes, I think Florida, we are a new blood. LSU, yes. Clemson, and then Ed. What about Auburn? I would I would say Auburn's a new blood. Would you?
Yeah, Auburn is on this list.
Oh, okay. I must have missed that. My apologies.
No worries. Auburn, definitely is in that new blood category. They have 2 all-time titles, and they have more than 750 wins all time. They've had a national title thanks to Cam Newton carrying an entire team of scrubs on his back.
Yeah.
And in the last 20 years, they've lost less than 100 games. It is it is a roller coaster ride with that program. You think they're doing really great and things are going really fast, uh, and you're getting all the fun out of it by raising your arms up in the air and doing the turns and hooray, and then all of a sudden it hits the incline and it just kind of puts along, and you're not doing nearly as well and it's not nearly as fun trying to climb
Yeah.
back up to the top of the mountain.
I really want
And
to.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. You can finish your thought.
I was just going to say, but once they will kind of climb their way to the top of that mountain, and then the ride starts all over again. So it's just so consistently up and down with that program. But in the end, they are relevant, they are marketable, they've had success, and they just need a consistency of success for a much longer period of time for them to break into that upper category.
Noted. I'm really curious though to see what your response is about what I said about Oregon. I mean, I stand by what I said. I think Oregon being a new blood is a complete joke. You don't have any national championships. Why should we consider you a new blood? Sorry to Matthew who's watching this, but you can't deny the truth.
I I would put Oregon uh, in a category as an almost there because
Hmm.
they've been to national championship games. They just haven't won any of them,
Yeah.
and one of them thanks to Auburn. Uh,
Yep.
so they have been one of the more consistently winning teams on the West Coast for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
And that is something that they've worked on the legacy portion of it. They have not gotten over the hump to get that national title. And there's no way that there's a conversation about them getting in the upper category without
Yeah.
a national title, but it's still going to be a ways before they are even
Well,
considered.
Well, and I would also say that like if there is a category that we can create for Oregon, I would say maybe put them in a category called New Beast, because I've said this before. I've said this on the very first episode of the show, and I think I've said this one or two other times. But Oregon has far and away of all the football programs who have not won a national championship yet. Oregon has by far the best chance of all those programs to win a national championship because they've got the recruiting. They've got the resources. Holy hell, do they have the resources? Especially, did you see the news that apparently Phil Knight is giving them unlimited NIL money?
Yes.
Yes. So Oregon has everything it needs, Ed, to succeed. So yeah, as I said before, like out of all the programs that have yet to win a national championship, I don't think you can tell me that any program in that category has a better chance than Oregon.
Yeah. And Oregon, they're on the cusp of getting to a national title, especially with this playoff system, because we all know the East Coast bias,
Mm-hmm.
what may have been not a major part, but at least a factor in what some of these decisions have been made in creating the playoff over the past 10 or so years that we've been in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Oregon, they're close to becoming relevant enough with legacy in the national championship, but they've got to get a national championship before they really are part of the conversation here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Uh, LSU, I don't think there's any question that they are on the cusp of being in that upper echelon category. Clemson, they've been on the rise, but I still think they need more time for more legacy than what they have.
Yeah, I think my comments about LSU. I don't. I can't consider LSU a blue blood because they don't have the history as other programs do. And in fact, you look at the history of LSU, they didn't really start to become nationally consistently relevant until Nick Saban came along. Now, to their credit, LSU has done a very good job of maintaining that consistency. Since Saban was their head coach. So yes, LSU is not a blue blood, but they are absolutely a new blood. And then as far as Clemson goes, I understand your hesitation, but I think their last championship at this point was 5 or 6 years ago, right? And the last time they won a national championship, I believe they were the first team since 1881 to go 15-0. I mean, that kind of history making has to count for something, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. And I but that's for a single season. That's not for a program as a whole.
Yeah, okay, that's a fair point.
So
But then you consider the title they won a couple years before, so they've won 2 titles in 3 years, and they have three as a whole in their program.
sure. And that is what puts them in this category, saying that if they have a consistent level of success for another, say, 10 to 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
that is in that upper echelon, then we can really talk about them being in that top category of blue blood instead of a new blood.
Well, I tell you what, if Clemson loses its grip on its new blood status, it'll be Dabo Sweeney's fault completely for just wanting to be a dinosaur and refusing to adapt to the new times.
Yeah, well, Dabo, just like the rest of the Clemson program, will be rolling down that hill instead of running down it.
Yeah.
The last category that we are mentioning here, this is we're calling old blood. This is teams that have legacy, could easily get back into the blue blood category, but they have lost their grip on being up there as a blue blood in the sport. So, just to run through this list: Nebraska, Florida State, Miami, Tennessee. Now, David, you said Florida State should be in the new blood category.
Absolutely.
To me, the fact that they were a blue blood and have fallen off from that puts them in this category more so than them being in the new blood category.
So even after they had an undefeated regular season, and they've been relevant under Mike Norvell under the last couple of years, you still don't think that's good enough to put them in the new blood?
How many head coaches have they had in the past 15 years?
Bobby Bowden, Willie Taggart, Mike Norvell. Oh, and Jimbo Fisher. Almost forgot about him. Oh, the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Sorry. What was 15 years ago? That would have been 2009. I think Jimbo Fisher was the coach then. It was either Fisher in his beginning stages or Bobby Bowden in his later stages. I
But
think Bobby Bowden.
you're talking in 15 years, 5 different head coach names.
Yeah.
And that is not as you only change head coaches unless a legacy head coach is retiring.
Okay.
You're only changing head coaches if somebody poached your head coach or you're not at a level of success to where it's not meeting the standard to be one of the cornerstones of college football. Mm-hmm. And at this point, Florida State is very close to getting back into the category of being a blue blood. And maybe they could have done it last year, but considering the circumstances of them not getting into the playoff, even after the undefeated season, that hurts them in this category. And it's not their fault, but it is what it is. So we have to go by what we have on paper for us to compare one program to another.
Okay.
And to me, that puts them in this old blood category with the idea that they very much could turn around and be back in the blue blood conversation.
Yeah.
They have the resources, they have the marketability, they have everything they need to do what they need to do. Right now, they're in a bit of a flux as where they're going to be as a program, what conference they're going to be. It's just where does that stand? And even that isn't part of this conversation. The conversation is how much success are you going to have, and is that level of success going to put you in the hall where you are a cornerstone of the sport as a whole?
Okay.
Do you agree, disagree with that assessment?
No, I think that's fair. I think the only thing I probably would disagree is when you say that, when you talk about Florida State being a blue blood, but I don't think Florida State has ever been a blue blood. I think they're the same as us. Uh, we're not a blue blood, but much like us, Florida State really didn't become successful until later on, until the '90s. But we're just splitting hairs here, and this can be a conversation for another time. But overall, I do get what you're saying, and I think you're making a fair point.
Okay. Um, I want to get through Miami and Tennessee because we both have thoughts on Nebraska.
I was wondering, like, when you were going to talk about Tennessee, actually.
Sure. Miami, since the Maurice Claret Ohio State Miami national championship game, uh, I really have not seen Miami be at the level that they need to be considered in the blue blood category. So that's why they're a contender at this point, and they could easily turn it around. Does the administration of that school
Mm.
care enough about the football team to do it? That's my question with Miami.
Well, they're certainly. I think they've been. I think they've been recruiting well enough under Mario Cristobal. For all the criticism that Mario gets, he has been doing a great job of recruiting. And then let me ask you this, Ed, because I think this is an important question to ask. Right? We're both in agreement here that to be blue blood, you have to have multiple national championships. Now, Miami has 5, right?
Yes.
But for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would venture to guess that in your eyes, it's not just enough to win national championships, but it's like, were you successful across multiple eras, multiple decades of college football? Whereas Miami's 5 national championships were kind of in a short, condensed period. Am I in the ballpark here with you?
So their first national championship, I believe, was '83,
Mm-hmm.
and I get what you're saying with that, but that has been long enough. It is 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
If you were talking that cluster of championships being in the last 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be absolutely right. But the fact that they have been relevant enough, and I I continue to say it, marketable enough uh, to as a program that gets people to watch college football, that that part of it, they're definitely there. They don't have the success, and now that they do not have a stadium that's on campus,
mm,
that is a terrible thing for that program. And
yeah.
that tells me that the administration does not care enough about the football program to give them the resources to make it back to the top of this mountain.
Yeah, um, and I think the other thing you have to consider too is the fact that Miami's success came when they were in the Big East Conference. They have not done jack squat since being in the ACC, other than like a few decent bowl wins, here and there. And then of course, Ed, with Miami not having their own stadium, having to share a stadium with the Dolphins. I mean, you tune into a Miami Hurricanes football game, and the stands are barely filled. Like, Miami fans love to talk a big game on Twitter, but when it actually comes to showing up to their games, they're nowhere to be found. And so I think it begs another fair question in this long list of questions: should fan support factor into being a blue blood?
I think fan support and fan interaction and tradition and one of the things that make the experience of going to a football game of that team different
Mm-hmm.
than anybody else should absolutely be considered. Just like the draft pick thing, it's considered. I think the fan interaction and the fan traditions should factor in a little more than just what draft picks, how many draft picks you get taken out.
Okay.
This is a team that's playing 40 minutes away from their campus.
That's
So
insane.
anybody that is on campus that wants to go to their football game has to drive across Miami in traffic to get to the stadium and then pay pro football prices to go into a half empty stadium to watch the Hurricanes play football. And that has me putting them in the old blood, and within the next 10 years you could see them disappear from this list altogether.
Yeah, and you know what's crazy, Ed? The University of South Florida, which is about 10 to 15 minutes from where I live, they are going to get their own stadium. Like that's another program that's had to share a stadium with the professional team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The USF Bulls are going to get their own stadium before Miami does. And USF historically is not nearly as successful as Miami. I mean, just think about that.
uh, it's it really comes down to the administration of the school, and
Yeah.
to me Miami is really on their way out. uh, you can talk about what their future holds in the next 4 to 5 years, but when we're talking about legacy of a program, you're going to need a whole heck of a lot more time than just the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and especially just consider where they're going to be. And this is the last thing we can talk about regarding Miami, but just think about where they're going to be when they move on from Cristobal, because I think Cristobal is going to get the axe soon, and like Miami's recruiting really didn't take off recently until Cristobal became their head coach, and Cristobal has always been known as an elite recruiter. Well, when they move on from him eventually, and again I think they will. Well, then it's like who do they have after that? Who do they go to after that?
Yeah, because they've run through several different head coaches since Larry Coker left.
Manny Diaz, Mark Richt. I'm sure there's a couple others that I can't think of, but yeah,
Yeah, it's been crazy there. Tennessee, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on them. They're on the come up at this point, but they are a team that is going to need a lot more to create a bigger legacy enough to be in this conversation. Would you agree
yeah.
with that?
Well, it's interesting, and it hurts me to say this as a Florida fan, Ed, but I I think Tennessee has the makings. I think Tennessee is good enough to be a blue blood. I mean, they have the wins, right? I think they have the history. They may not have as many national championships as Michigan or Alabama. But when you look at their overall pedigree, I have to ask why can't they be good? Why can't they be good enough to be a blue blood? I think I would put them there, and that hurts me to say this as a rival fan.
You would put Tennessee as a blue blood of college football?
Well, all right. How many wins? How many wins do they have? Let's look it up.
852.
Wait, what?
852.
Okay, so they have 800 plus wins, right? And then as far as national championships go, so Tennessee claims 6, okay? That's what they claim. But Ed, how many do they have in the AP era?
2.
Okay, so Tennessee claims, then like why does Tennessee claim 6 even though the AP only credits them for 2? And like this is obviously a very long discussion. I don't want to get too much into it, but it is kind of fascinating to me.
Because there's been a dozen different sites or uh, news outlets, coaches outlets, organizations that handed out uh, national championships based upon who they thought the national champion was,
Mm.
and a lot of those uh, during the time that they were handing those out did not have full capability of watching the teams that were not in their immediate vicinity. So
Okay.
they have zero opportunity to make the comparison between who they see in front of them and who's going to be across the country. So
Okay.
you saw more regional bias in these national championships that were handed out in the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s. Uh, and that's where a lot of those for Tennessee wound up being placed.
Okay, well, in that case, uh, I guess I'm not really educated enough to form an opinion about what I think about Tennessee. But obviously, you don't consider them a blue blood, and I think you make a very good argument for that.
I would, if anything, I would put them in the limbo category with Penn State.
Okay, that's fair.
Uh, Now with Nebraska,
Oh, I cannot wait to talk about Nebraska here.
uh, I think Nebraska is the epitome of an old blood. They are they up until just into the 2000s, they were one of the most dominant programs in the country, and there was no stopping them. And it pained me to see them lose their status, lose their identity, lose everything, uh, trying to update their offense to what was considered modern at that time, because they got that status on the back of hard nosed defense, a bunch of corn fed guys that were out there just taking a break from uh, working in the fields, and a style of offense that was like Novocaine. You just gave it time and it always worked. And they would recruit some fantastic running backs to make that train go. And boy, did they. Uh, in fact, in the mid 90s, they were probably a play away from uh, playing for the national title for a third season in a row until my Longhorns had a famous play in our history known as roll left. If you've never seen it, I would highly recommend it. It is oh, the lead up into the play itself was just phenomenal. And one of Brett Musburger's actually good calls,
Yeah, yeah.
and was actually the game in which Priest Holmes got noticed by Dick Vermeil, who then drafted him to the Kansas City Chiefs. So there's that little bit of trivia there.
Yeah.
My point on Nebraska is I mentioned before about football players that were taking a break from working in the fields to come
Hmm.
play football or work out for football because they had gotten all their chores done, which when you're working outdoors in an agricultural area, you are working 7 days a week. There are no off days. There are no weekends. There is none of that. You are working all the time. Well, as farming has become more modernized and without the need for as many hands out there to make the farming happen, I feel like there are less of those guys that Nebraska used to recruit for Nebraska to go get now. And that has led to a portion of Nebraska's downfall, if that's what you want to call it,
Hmm.
uh, because what they built their program on doesn't exist anymore. So now they're having to go about it a different way, and the the school itself, the fans of that school, everybody in that vicinity, everybody that is that makes Lincoln Stadium the third largest city, the largest city in Nebraska every Saturday afternoon. They do not have the players based upon the hard nosed ideology that made Nebraska what it is, and
Mm,
that's a big reason why they have fallen off. They can't recruit near as much because they don't have those players within their vicinity, so they're having to go much further and get
mm,
players that are not part of the Nebraska value core system.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, no argument from me here, Ed. I mean, I'll just add to what you've been saying that Nebraska dominated college football at the absolute perfect time. You know, back when college football was the era of the farm boy, right? You know, Nebraska, I think, was the ultimate blue collar football team. They were the prime example of a blue collar football team, and that era is pretty much gone now. You know, as far as recruiting goes, I think you're completely spot on, Ed. You know, when we're talking about recruiting, like when we're talking about that, the state of Nebraska is really in the middle of nowhere. Like, not only is the state of Nebraska not a recruiting hotbed, but the state is not. They're not really anywhere near states that are recruiting hotbeds, right? It's not like you know, it's not like Tennessee, and you know, I could be mistaken on this, but I don't think the state of Tennessee is a recruiting hotbed. Certainly not the same way as states like Georgia or Louisiana. But the thing about Tennessee is that Tennessee is in close proximity to those states that have, you know, that are recruiting hotbeds. The state of Nebraska doesn't have that luxury anymore. So, but when it comes to Nebraska, the program, they certainly have the history. They certainly have the legacy. They have the tradition. And by the way, we talked about fan support before, Ed, and nobody packs that stadium more than Nebraska fans. Like, even as they go through perpetual mediocrity, Ed, those fans still pack that stadium, man. So, I mean, I am inclined to believe that I don't think Nebraska will ever be relevant again, or certainly not as relevant as they used to be, precisely because, as I said before, you know, they dominated college football at a time where that era doesn't exist anymore. And Nebraska, the state, is not a recruiting hotbed, and they're not anywhere near recruiting hotbeds. But there is something to be said about a school that has the tradition they do, the legacy they do, and the fan support that they do. So, do I think they're going to be relevant anytime soon, like they were before? No, I don't. But if they do become relevant like they were before, I would not be surprised given the reasons that I gave.
Two things on that. One, I think they definitely have an opportunity to become relevant by success here shortly because I'm a believer in Matt Rule.
Mm,
He is a great program builder, and if he is settled in a spot that he knows is his spot that he doesn't want to go, then he has the opportunity to make that into what it needs to be
yeah.
for them to be uh, at the level that we're talking about them trying to get to. I don't think Nebraska is going to fall from this contenders category for a very long time because of that fan support, because of that recognition, because of everything that people know about Nebraska football here 20 years later from the last time that they've been relevant through success.
Let me. Oh, sorry. I didn't. I think you were about to finish your thought. Go ahead.
Uh, my second point is you're absolutely right on recruiting because I have seen years where the number one player in Nebraska as a whole was a 3-star.
Exactly. And in fact, Ed, like I just checked 24/7 Sports on my phone, and the number one player in Nebraska right now, national ranked, he's 205, I think. So
Yeah. How many
yeah,
stars is he?
that's 4 stars, but I
4 stars?
believe he's the only 4 star. There might have been one other. There might have been one other 4 star after that, but yeah, mostly 3 stars in that state.
Exactly. So, uh, those those points, I think we've both seen the same thing. So, um, so it's just different ways of kind of thinking through where Nebraska has been,
Mm,
on what has caused this. Now the question becomes, what do they do to fix it? And
mm.
they started with a program builder like Matt Rule, and I think they have the opportunity to start getting some of those players back in uh, when they can find them.
I
When
do
you take a
think.
look at a program like the Houston Cougars, they only have to go 57 miles to fill in their entire roster. Nebraska has to go 283, or was it 283 or was it 400? I'm trying to remember.
We'll just
Um,
go with we'll go with like 330 for the median.
sure. So you have to go over 300 miles to fill your roster, and that's a hard thing to do, especially in the climate of today, where the head coach has to recruit not only his new players from high school, the ones in the transfer portal, and his own team to keep them out of the transfer portal, and you're having to stretch so far to
Mm.
make that recruiting happen that it's a lot tougher to do in a place like Nebraska than some other places. But I think Matt Rule has an opportunity in front of him.
Let me ask you a question, and for what I believe will probably be the final question for the night. I agree with you about Matt Rule. I mean, his history as a successful program builder speaks for itself. Okay, but let's assume that things don't work out under Matt Rule and they move on from him. Do you think that Nebraska should consider taking the Dion Colorado approach? So you take Colorado, right? Much like Nebraska, the state. Okay, not only is Colorado the state, not only is it not a recruiting hotbed, but it's not anywhere near states that are also recruiting hotbeds. But unlike Nebraska, Colorado doesn't have the prestige, right? Colorado does not have the prestige that Nebraska has, and we all know that they're getting the guys that they're getting primarily because of Prime, right? Prime primarily.
Yeah,
But yeah, but do you think that if things don't work out under Matt Rule, that Nebraska should consider taking the Dion Colorado approach?
I think there's a greater chance for Nebraska to raise their level of high school football to meet the expectation of doing better than what they have been than Colorado does. Uh, to maintain at this point, Nebraska's done everything they can uh, to find the coach that fills that program
Hmm.
in a way like Dion. They went out and got Bill Callahan. They went out and got their legacy guy in Scott Frost.
We all thought he was going to do great at Nebraska, and we were so wrong.
We were dead wrong as far as uh, his success level at Nebraska as a head coach. He was a hell of a player, but that was a plug and play system that he was in.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, not sorry. Um, but now with Matt Rule, he knows how to take programs that are in that situation and do something good with it. So we will see if he can get them back into the blue blood category. For them, I don't think it's going to take 15 years. If they have 10 years of top tier success, then they will definitely be back in that category along with with the programs that we talked about before. So just to recap, before we say goodnight, uh, we have the Blue Bloods that we agree on: Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Michigan, Notre Dame, Texas, USC. Georgia's almost there. Penn State's in purgatory. The new bloods for sure: LSU, Clemson, Florida, Auburn. Oregon's got a long way to go. Florida State is in purgatory along with Penn State. The old bloods: Nebraska, Miami, Tennessee. Uh, do you have any final thoughts on that list as a whole, David?
I mean, I think we're pretty much in agreement with everything, Ed. Just as I said before, I would put Florida State in the new blood category. I absolutely do not consider Oregon a new blood, but other than that, I think we're in agreement with pretty much all those schools in their respective categories.
Yeah. We'll go back and we'll think on this some more. And uh, we are going to take a hiatus of a couple of weeks and get back ready to go for football season in August. I want to say thank you and look out for content that's going to drop over the next couple of weeks with us not doing the show. But until next time we see you, everybody, and thank you, friends. We are rounding third and we are headed for home.